It was 1878 and South Central Pennsylvania was still hurting from the loss of so many lives on the battlefields of the Civil War. America was slowly healing as North and South were returning to a union. It was also a time of renewed faith in God. Post-Civil War America was experiencing a great spiritual awakening. Springing up in the 1870s were men and women who began preaching about God's holiness and the need for full salvation that came with heart purity by the Holy Spirit. Heart holiness was calling people to a deeper, fuller journey with Jesus. Evangelical flames emerged out of tent meetings that popped up all over central Pennsylvania. The camp meetings, they were called formed associations. They had no buildings yet, but used big old circus tents. Some held services every night at 8 p.m. for weeks at a time. One of these groups became known as the Evangelical Association. Farmers and their families, like the Daniel Glass, Thomas Schuff, and John Griffey families, were attending these meetings. They came back to the rolling hills of Cumberland and Adams counties, farms and orchards, and began discussing the starting of a new evangelical church. In the Central Pennsylvania Conference, record shows a church forming and a pastor assigned in 1878. That summer of 1878, a small wooden one-room church was built. Land was purchased by those families mentioned for $15.56 from David and Sarah LaRue. They called it Flint Ridge Chapel. With its backdrop comprising of the rich mineral-filled mountains of the South Mountain Range, there was a wonderful place for the new congregation to worship.
Earliest memories, of course, has to be Vacation Bible School. I wasn't born at this church. I was originally at Mount Tabor Church, and I was, don't know, maybe 3 or 4 when we started attending here. And I remember coming to Vacation Bible School here and then going for a week of, actually it was 2 weeks, and then going for 2 weeks of Vacation Bible School at Mount Tabor also.
My first memory, I guess, is when I was very small. In our church, all the classes met within the church. We had probably 7 or 8 classes. Our church, or our section of the church for the children, was up on the right side where the organ now sits. And they had a curtain which they drew around a square area for we children. And our teacher was Belle Sowers. And she taught for many, many years. I don't have any idea how many, but she was our teacher. One of the other things that I remember is the men's group, or the men's class, which we had a balcony in the back part of our church, and that's where the men met, in the balcony. That is one of the things I remember. The first minister I remember was Reverend Lundy.
The orchards grew. Manufacturing here in Central PA grew, and so did the small church, the Flint Ridge Chapel. In 1912, there was interest growing for the constructing of a larger sanctuary. 2 tracts of land were purchased from the longtime Gardener's resident, Uriah T. Gardner, for $100. Groundbreaking happened in the fall of 1913, and throughout the winter, construction took place, and Grace Evangelical Church became the new name for the new house of worship. It would become a beautiful brick structure with a chancel, balcony, a bell tower with Gothic style. That bell has become a new neighborhood icon, and over the years, it became known in this community as the bell that would ring on Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. Ken Ream, his father and family, were involved in ringing that bell for over 60 years.
Calling people to church. And before I rang it, Wendell rang it. And I think Dad rang it before Wendell rang it. And my mother said, I want it wrong 100 times. And that's how many times it's rung every morning.
At the dedication service in May 1914, the Reverend William Stanford came and spoke from the Central PA Conference. His honoring message was this: Uriah is a good, genuine, old-time country appointment on the Idaville Charge Central Pennsylvania Conference. The esteemed pastor, Reverend A.L. Burkett, formerly of the Pittsburgh Conference, lives in Dillsburg, Pennsylvania, in the famous Cumberland Valley. This is his third year on this charge, and he is highly appreciated by his people. It is really refreshing to see a good country point like this moving onward and upward. If we are to live and thrive as a church in the future, as in the past, we must keep up our work in the country. Mark what I say, the very fact that some of the larger denominations are beginning to neglect the country and are drifting largely toward the town and city is all the more a good reason why we should make special efforts in the country. Chief reasons for this are: the country needs the gospel of Jesus Christ as well as the city. They need salvation, and we have no right to neglect them. Our Lord's command was to carry the gospel to all of the world, and that includes the country. Moreover, the country deserves her share of the best preachers we have, and any genuine preacher should regard it an honor to be given a charge out in the pure air where it is healthy and where he can have a chance for good exercise in raising vegetables and chickens. Our country people have as good as a right to good preaching as the city people do. In those early days of the 20th century, many days of worship and ministry took place here at Uriah. Following World War I in 1919, a great holiness revival took place at Uriah. It is reported that somewhere between 100 and 125 people were saved. In 1933, the first records were written of a church board, and our church was officially organized from a mission to a full congregation. Attendance continued to grow, reaching as many as 240 in the 1930s. After World War II, the country was growing and the work of the gospel did too.
But Belle would take us out, and we would meet together out there on the lawn, and there was two great big maple trees, and we would meet under the one maple tree on the left as we go out. That was a gathering point for everybody in the church. One of the things you remember is the gathering point where after church, the men would go out and stand under the trees and tell their hunting stories or whatever, fishing or whatever was happening. But there was a lot of good stories traveled from under those maple trees.
When I was teaching the elderly ladies class, we were in the front corner of the church. My husband was a member of the men's class, which was in the back corner. Didn't know this till we got home. I'll tell you how well my husband listens to me. His teacher, which was Lester Miller, was teaching. And I said to my class, let's bow our heads for prayer. And the next thing he knew, he was bowing his head for prayer.
In 1946, Uriah's name changed when the Evangelical Church merged with the United Brethren to form a denomination. The new name became Grace Evangelical United Brethren Church of Uriah. Another incredible blessing occurred that same year. A young, energetic evangelist came to Uriah, who was the Reverend Ralph Boyer of York, Pennsylvania. A new fire emerged at Uriah when Reverend Boyer preached for 3 solid weeks every night. His ministry brought God's love and grace into our church and our community, and 48 people were saved.
The first one I remember, I was in 4th grade, and we had a man named Ralph Boyer from York, Pennsylvania.
This would become the spark that would ignite Uriah Church for many years, and for the rest of the 20th century became that time period where leaders were being formed and the ministry of the church continued. Attendance boomed again, and the conversations began on how the church house could be expanded. It was a major renovation. In 1951, Uriah Church was stripped down to its studs, and the sanctuary was enlarged. Increased seating was a part of that, and they even added a basement. The area of the sanctuary around the building was enlarged and cared for. Bathrooms were installed, and our beautiful stained glass windows that we love and cherish were finally installed. In the fall of 1951, the new Uriah Sanctuary was rededicated and everyone moved in. Remember all those GIs who came home from World War II? Many were members of Uriah. They started getting married and having children, so many in fact that the new addition was built 10 years later in 1961. In 1964, our country church was featured in the Evangelical United Brethren's magazine with this incredible page spread of the Uriah Church and its people. The Trumps, the Breams, the Marks, the Glass family, the Reams, the Richwines, and many others were featured. Even pictures from the breakfast table were included. Can you believe that? Many discovered across the country the blessings that God had lovingly bestowed upon our country church.
Our forefathers was real strong in the faith, and it just led down through the ages that we carried the same message, you know, to everyone. We try to anyway.
Well, I think the strong point here is it's always had the prayer meetings. Every week there was a prayer meeting going on. So I think that's the backbone of it.
And also, our church has always been one that has focused on salvation, and that's the only way to Christ and the only way to heaven. And our pastors have been faithful in preaching that word, and our people have believed that word, and have been, those who have been committed to that message have helped the growth of the church.
In the late 1960s, the Evangelical United Brethren Church leaders began talks with the Methodist Episcopal Church. The Methodists were 10 million strong globally, and the Evangelical United Brethren were about 500,000, spread mostly across North America. With very similar beliefs and theology, the two merged in 1968, 50 years ago, to form the United Methodist Church. They became one church, with the members of Uriah voting to join, and we would become Uriah United Methodist Church. In the late 60s and early 70s, Uriah here became a part of the Susquehanna Conference in the middle of Pennsylvania, with close to 800 churches strong. Many, many families have been blessed by the ministry of Uriah Church. Countless weddings, baptisms, confirmations, special holiday services, and year-round outreach events are a part of the story. Uriah continues to reach out to this day. Peach festivals, mission trips, outdoor music festivals, trunk and treats, VBS, and a food pantry reaches our community. Now, in 2018, we celebrate our 140th anniversary. Today marks this milestone of many years, faces, names, and lives that have come to Jesus. So, now that you've heard the stories, some of you have lived them, but some of these stories are new. But either way, let's all make it a point today, and until the Lord returns, to make the Uriah United Methodist Church story part of our story. Let's place our lives, our story, into what God has done and the great story Uriah has become, that of a great God and his Son who have shown favor on their church. Get involved in serving in the mission to make disciples of Jesus for the transformation of the world.
One thing that has kept this church going for 140 years is family. Not one family, but several families who work as one family. It's a family place. Now, don't get me wrong, there's some times that there are squabbles between families and between different families, and we have that occasionally, as any church that goes, but we've always been able to work through things with in the Lord's grace, and it has been something.
We had some wonderful, wonderful teachers. We had a superintendent. I think he was superintendent for 30 plus years. We had periods of time here when we had an average for Sunday school of 200 or better. In this little old country church, that is an example as to what type of leadership and family coordination we had in this church.
But there were many people here faithful to the cause of Christ, and that they would need to continue to be faithful as well.
I would want them to make sure that they should be dedicated to the Lord. Take that commitment very seriously. And if you're asked to do something and help, don't say, I can't. Say, I'll try. And that's what I'd like them to know.
It's a church that believes in being converted, being saved, and carrying the message on to the unsaved.
Join us as we help people discover Jesus to help them connect, grow, and serve. Let's focus on our part of the world, Gardners, Pennsylvania, and then beyond.